Hello, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 6 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Becca, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey, and they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. And we're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
Hello, Becca. Today we are talking with Andrew Bush. Andrew is a mobile engineer specializing in React Native. And so if you've been to virtualcoffee.io recently and checked out our members page, you might have noticed we now have, we have all of our members there. And now we have little tags that say what roles that they have if people are, volunteering, helping out in Virtual Coffee. And so Andrew is one of the people that has been helping out with us for a while. He's been helping lead the monthly challenge team for the past, I don't know, how long has he been? I'm not sure. I can't remember off the top of my head how long, but it feels like a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah, it feels like to me it's been a while.
Since last year, for sure.
Yeah. And so monthly challenges you can read more about on our site as well. But we do a different challenge every month. And yeah, so Andrew's been helping lead that group along with Arlie, and who was on the podcast season. I don't remember which season, but she was on. Yeah, she was on. She was on a while ago too. So yeah, we'll talk about that for a while. And Andrew also, he kind of talked about, what it's been like leading the group and helping facilitate challenges, stuff like that. And we also talked a while about what it's like to be a mobile developer, some of his experiences with React Native, and of course his journey through his career.
Yeah, it was great talking about that. And I really love that the tags recognize our members and what they're doing. I mean, not just because we want to recognize our members, but also it helps other people to see who's doing what and how they can get involved in Virtual Coffee. And we actually have a new Get Involved section on the site. So if anybody is out there and wants to add a tag to their name, you can fill out one of those forms and we can...
and they can get involved.
Yep, that was good.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you want to check that out, it's in the resources section, virtualcoffee.io/resources. And then, I don't know, click through in there. It's in there somewhere. So yeah, it was a good episode overall. And I know you're going to enjoy it.
We start every episode of the podcast like we start every Virtual Coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. We hope you enjoy this episode. Our intro question is, if you could live in an animated movie, what would it be? My name is Becca. I am a technical community builder from a small town in Ohio. And I would live in... I feel like it needs to have some kind of magical aspect to it because that would be more fun. I was going to say Beauty and the Beast because that's my favorite movie. I'll just stick with that.
Pre-Beast conversion or post? Like, is he still the Beast? Basically, I mean, and all the other, fun.
Yeah, because there's no more magic if he's not the Beast.
Right. That was my question.
It's kind of boring.
But if he's the Beast, then, you got a whole other problem to deal with. So.
Yeah. I wonder if his fur is soft.
I actually just watched it with the kids. It was their first time like a week or two ago. I hadn't watched it for a long time. So like all the furniture are his servants or whatever, his household staff. Well, did he not have furniture at all before that? Or did they all turn into furniture and then they just threw out the existing non-alive furniture?
Everybody is furniture. I think it's kind of got that Encanto vibe where there's magic in the house. So the head of all of the cups is Mrs. Potts, but not every cup is a household worker. They just have the magic now.
Oh wait, you're saying alive cups, but they weren't actually people before. They just
right, just
the
like
magic
Mrs.
is turning.
Potts
Okay.
and Chip, they were people. But there are other cups that move around and do things, but that's just the magic that is commanding the
Got it.
enchanting the house.
Okay. All right. Hi, Dan. I do web development in Cleveland, Ohio, and I think the first thing that popped in my mind was Moana. Um, the you know, the life there seems pretty simple. On the island. Plus, canoeing is one of my favorite things, and so that'd be cool. Maui seems like a cool hang, so I'm going with Moana as my animated universe to live in.
Are you taking your rain shell with you?
Probably. I won't have to use it very much, but I'm sure it rains there sometimes. There's like a rainy season, right? I would think. Thanks for that.
Just making sure you had it. I know it's
Okay.
important to you.
It is.
And I'm Andrew, and I'm a mobile developer in the React Native space based out of Wisconsin. I think I'd live in the Valley in Encanto, but I have a bit of a recency bias. I think that's the most recent animated film I've seen. But I, the in the intro sequence, there's these. It's in Colombia, and in the intro sequence, there's these kids who are running with little cups of coffee, and they're shaking, and the coffee's splashing out of the cups. I'd be like one of those little kids. That's my vibe.
Nice.
Yeah. That is my kids love, or my 5-year-old loves that part where she says, Mirabelle says, "That's why coffee is for grown-ups." They just laugh every single time. So welcome, Andrew. Thank you so much for being here with us for this episode of our podcast. And we always like to get started with the origin story of each of our guests. So what brought you here to the state of your Andrew developer career?
All right, I should have expected a question like this. I got to work on my elevator pitch anyway. Yeah, it's sort of I don't know if there is a traditional path, but I would say mine is non-traditional. The first time I ever wrote code was HTML, not even like full-blown HTML, just tags to make my MySpace page cooler. And then a long time later, I thought I'd go to school for that, and that didn't go super well for me. My major wasn't partying, so they kicked me out. And, I did, after sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grow up for many years, I was like, I actually really liked programming, and I really liked web development specifically. So I had sort of sorted things out, and I went back to school again, got an associate's degree, and thought, all right, I just need to get a job. I need to get into the space. And I took an interview for a very generic, you're going to write code, but they didn't tell me what. And I ended up writing React Native code. And I did not expect to be in the mobile developer space. And I actually really enjoyed it. And that's where I've stuck since then. And that's gotten me to here.
Yeah, so this has always been fascinating to me because I don't know that many React Native developers. So can you talk a little bit about how you ended up there? Because it's not, at least I don't know a ton of people doing React Native development. First of all, wait, maybe let's pause. And what is React Native development? And then answer my other question.
All right, yeah. So React Native is a cross-platform framework for mobile apps. They are into the web space now, so you can write all in one stack and then deploy wherever. But yeah, the original intention is so that you can have, a single code base and single skill sets to be able to write Android and iOS applications, because native Android applications are going to be in Java or Kotlin, and then native iOS that's going to be in Swift. So rather than having, especially in a professional environment, distinct teams, knowing distinct stacks and trying to always keep those things in sync, React Native is one of the solutions that was out there. When I first started, we started with native script, which is just another one of the options out there, and then ended up pivoting because of the community support for React Native. It's made by Facebook, so there's just a lot of support and funding behind it. But yeah, it's at its core, it's JavaScript. But professionally, I've always used TypeScript on top of it.
That's cool. And so does that work out? From what I understand, I've never really worked in it aside from dabbling. Um, but from what I understand, you have the ability to do some native stuff if you need to or whatever in like real apps, in non-classroom apps that you like the kind of stuff you're actually working on. Does the cross-platform thing like honestly like work out really well? As opposed like, or do you end up having to do like weird little things for different platforms from time to time?
Yeah, well, it in my experience, which I would, for context, I've been doing it professionally for about 3 years. So in my experience, rarely do we actually need to write native code. Occasionally, you'll run into we had some weird issue with splash screens in my previous job, and the solution was a native solution. But a lot of times you find you can just get a package that'll handle that for you. But yeah, actually, most things are pretty seamless. The I guess the overhead you get is recognizing that since it builds across multiple platforms, it's not always going to when it gets compiled, it's not going to behave in exactly the same way every time. There's always like little quirks, and sometimes it's specifically on device. So we've got we when you write it, you frequently when you're deving, you're like using a simulator or an emulator, but then like before you roll out to production, and as our QAs tell me when I'm doing dev work too, I need to test on physical device because that uncovers more issues that you don't see. So that's like the big thing with it, I guess, more so than, I don't know, I sort of lost the plot there.
More so than different platforms and stuff is really just if I can understand what you're saying, more the fact that you're working specifically for you're building an app for a device that somebody holds in their hand, right? And so as opposed to something on a screen with a
Right.
mouse or another pointer device.
Right.
So yeah, that seems like probably good advice. It's probably easy to forget when you're in the weeds, kind of been developing for a long time on a thing, and you're just looking at your simulator on your computer. I certainly like just even on websites have that same thing, right? Where I forget, I look at it, I see what it looks like on the iPhone, a simulator or that in dev tools even, which is even another further step removed from the actual thing. Right. But it's always good to take a pass, see what it feels like swiping things or just scrolling, like how it looks scrolling on your, for an iPhone, at least it has the, what do you call this scroll that keeps going when you flick it? I can't remember what it's called, but there's a name for it. But like on an iPhone, when you scroll, everyone is used to it. You scroll with your finger and you kind of flick it and it keeps going, right?
Mhm.
Which is what most people on computers, are using. Don't have that, right? They're using a touchpad or a scroll bar, whatever, and it stops, right? And that experience is a little bit different. You're going to see things, especially if you have interaction going on. Scroll interaction, things like that. Seems like a pretty important step to take. So
That's
that's
actually really interesting. I don't, I there might be a specific name for it. I'm not thinking of it either, but continuous scrolling or maybe something like that. But yeah, it's interesting when developing in it. There are certain things that each platform will natively do on its own. And in my experience, I try and create apps that are consistent. So an iOS user, I want them to see exactly what an Android user sees, but you also have to be aware of, well, what are platform specific things that say an iPhone user is going to expect when they're in their apps, right? Navigation is one,
totally.
right? iPhones don't have hardware buttons for back navigation. It's like by default, they usually have a little back arrow in the corner. But yeah, to that scrolling, um, It's interesting on those types of scrollable things in apps. There's a really slick animation, I think, that just kind of is native to iOS. That when you get to, it does that infinite scroll, and I just think it looks really smooth. And you get to the bottom of the list, and it kind of bounces there at the bottom, and I think it looks really good.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't happen natively on Android. And it's
Hmm.
like, hmm.
Yeah. I looked it up. It's called momentum scrolling. And I think that includes that scroll past that exact behavior you're talking about. But it's because it is cool. And I've like looked at it and tried to recreate it a couple times in JavaScript or whatever, but it does have momentum scrolling is a great name for it because it's like it really does. You flick it and it starts fast and goes and then slows down and stuff like that. Anyway, momentum scrolling. That's what it's called.
It's just been a really
So-
long week, and in my mind, I was like, I want that to be my nickname. That doesn't make any sense, but I like it.
I'd say by itself, momentum is a pretty cool nickname.
Yeah.
The scrolling
Yeah.
part is sort of weird to assign to a human.
Yeah. Not sure where to go with that either. So I have some minimal experience with React Native. And so one of the questions people ask me all the time is, well, what's the difference? Like what's the learning curve from React to React Native, which I actually think that React Native is easier to learn. But I say that as somebody who learned React first. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Andrew. I just like, here's a view. It's not a div, it's a view. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I've gone the other way. I wouldn't say I've learned React, so to speak. I sort of vicariously have by doing React Native. But yeah, I went the other way. I started with React Native and I've done some dabbling in React. I think, right, the distinct differences I notice, one is like in the JSX. So where you're using traditional HTML type tags, you don't use those in React Native. You use traditional native tags. I remember seeing like view, scroll view, text input, like these very declarative names. I did a little bit of development in Xamarin in college. And that was a mobile framework that uses like XML type markup, and it had very similar naming structure. So like that stuff was super familiar to me. But yeah, I find like that kind of stuff just makes sense. Yeah, I think really the other sort of, it's more of a mental contextual shift between the two. Like knowing that you're working on a mobile device that it receives taps, it doesn't receive clicks, it receives like swipes, and you got to just be aware of the user experience is very different. I think of like another member of VC, Lewis. He coincidentally joined my team and at work, and he had never done React Native, and he ramped up so fast. He had React experience, and he was instantly making contributions. So I think, yeah, one skill set can really help you with the other.
Yeah, I for sure. And it's interesting because I heard somebody talking about React Native documentation once where they said initially there was an assumption that everybody who was doing React Native was coming from React. And then when they asked for feedback, they found that actually there were a lot of non-React developers that were coming in. So there were assumptions built into the documentation about where folks were at, and then they took that feedback and updated things and made it approachable for I would say more of an entry level learner to navigate through the documentation, which is always fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm no superhero, so like I read those documentation, like I read that still on a regular basis. But I'm not poring over it like I did in the beginning. But I remember I would frequently have to pop back over to like, well, what's the React documentation? Because that has like context that I need. I found that definitely to be true. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm coming from like when I was in school, they taught us Angular JS, whatever I think it's the framework that people don't like as much, the version of Angular. And it's like is framework experience. That's what I had. But otherwise, it was just JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and some PHP. So like it really coming into like choosing a framework, it kind of was like, well, I know JavaScript, so I can kind of figure this out.
I love that mentality that, you know, just like the confidence to, be able to know you can like pick something else up, even if it's going to take a minute. We were just talking about that with Roger, I think, on our last podcast recording. We're talking about like learning and how that's one of those things once you like get some job experience, and you realize like everybody's kind of in the same boat. And like new big things become a little less scary because even if it's just a big black box, that you don't really know anything about, not like once you've figured out your way around one programming, I don't know, language, paradigm or whatever. So many of the things transfer, some of the concepts transfer, Roger was saying like, all you really need to know is like ifs and for loops, or whatever. And you can pretty much get your way through any language. I was like, which I agreed with, in principle, they're all kind of doing a lot of the same stuff. So that's cool.
I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit because I know you said that you've been a developer for about 3 years, and that's where I've been too. So I know for me, COVID impacted a lot of my early job experience. And I'm just curious if that impacted you as well. And I know, early career developers trying to find community and then suddenly being isolated creates extra challenges on top of things.
Yeah, so my story there is I had a job at a local company, and I mean, Wisconsin cost of living isn't very high. I mean, depending where you live. Where I live, it's not. Therefore, pay is not very high. So I took a local job, and uh, you know, compensation was yeah. But I was sticking around, and because it was my first job at the time, and I just worked with that company to get career growth, and then the pandemic started. I've been doing it a year and a half, almost 2 years at that point. No, I don't know. Time math is hard for me. That's why
Yeah.
there are libraries for that. Uh, and yeah, then the pandemic started, and my company was immediately like, everybody go home. We're going virtual. And I left the office that day and didn't look back. I was stoked to come work from home. Because I'm legally blind, so like commuting, I just depend on somebody else to get me to work. That was uh inconvenient for my fiance, inconvenient for my wallet if I needed to, get like a ride share or something. I mean, my work was 6 miles away. Maybe somebody can bike that every day, but I'm just not for it. I'm realizing I'm giving a really long drawn out answer to this.
No, it's
Okay.
great.
So yeah, so with them and then to that same point, like with my vision, it's just way easier for me to be comfortable at home. Like the ergonomics of my setup. I have my monitors are mounted. So, I have 27-inch monitors. They're like a very modest size. Even maybe on the large side. And I get them inches from my face. But because they're mounted, I can have my keyboard like, way farther back. So I get that nice, 90 degree in my elbows, but I can still see. And like I just can't do that in an office. I can't be comfortable. Yeah, so it was like really good for me. But I quickly noticed, like, especially when you took away like the being at work water cooler type stuff, spending time with coworkers. It's like I don't like this company that much, and I'm very alone. Um, and so I needed a new job. I started looking, and I was just not, like, even with 2 years experience, right? I was taking interviews, and they wanted people with more experience than me, or yeah, I just wasn't it. Whatever it was they were looking for, I wasn't it. And I thought, well, okay. So everybody tells me, I remember in school and just throughout my life, they're like, oh, it's about who you know, not what you know. And like, you should do networking. And I thought, I am uh, an introvert. So no, thank you. I don't want to do that. And I was listening to a podcast, a tech podcast. I can't remember which one now, but actually you were on it, Becca, and you had talked about virtual coffee. And I was like, okay, that sounds different. That sounds like, it's networking, right? But it's not traditionally what I think of. And it's a community of people doing the same thing that I'm doing. And I need that. And I am so glad I listened to whatever that podcast was.
Maybe the React Native podcast.
It's very possible. Yeah, and it struck me, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna join this community, and I did that, and yeah, ever since like I joined VC, I got this like sense of self-confidence that I really needed, I think, for finding a job outside of where I live, um and a community of like other people working to better themselves technically or even non-technically. It's the thing I love about this community too, is it's not just about the work that we do. Um, so that was Virtual Coffee. It was the launch platform that got me to the job that I got. It actually, like, in actual tangible terms, I got my job through a different avenue, but I think sort of the confidence in myself that I gained, oh, I had like access to people who could help me. How do I present myself at interviews? How do I get better at that? How do I answer X coding question? And that all led me to, I think, finding success and finding a job and finding an equitable job, right? Like, so I was like I opened with, I had limited options locally, limited tech stacks, limited pay, limited benefits, and I was able to get a fair compensation by being able to look elsewhere, and being confident enough to look elsewhere and say, I am worth this.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that you're doing at Virtual Coffee. And so, we're happy to have you here no matter what, but especially you're one of our monthly challenge team leads. And so I feel like you've really invested in the community and supporting other people to find that feeling of connectedness and community that seems pretty important to your journey. You want to talk a little bit about what you do as monthly challenge co-team lead?
Yeah, for sure. For me doing that is right. That is my opportunity to give back to Virtual Coffee in terms of, I got so much out of Virtual Coffee, and it feels like I can't give back to this community what it gave to me. And I think I just feel compelled to like volunteer and help others get what I got, because my life, like, from before Virtual Coffee, from me sitting at my desk at that last job to where I am today, oh my gosh, I I have grown so much, and I'm so happy with where I've ended up. And a lot, there's a lot of influences in how that happened, but I recognize the part that virtual coffee played in that. And so me doing the monthly challenge is giving back to that. And so yeah, for virtual coffee, we like, I mean, obviously you two know this, but we do a monthly challenge, and that will consist of, we have 12-ish, or I think a little bit more, like maybe 13 topics that we will cover throughout the year, and assign them to a month, and that's what we'll focus on. And folks in the community are free to participate in those challenges as a way to, expand their own skill set, or as their own opportunity for growth. So for this upcoming month, for April, we are doing, we are focusing on jobs, on the job search and job preparation. And so like what I do for that and what that will look like, I guess, is each challenge looks a little bit different, but there are some like commonalities. And so we like to try and engage with the community throughout the challenge, and provide resources and basically support for them to grow. And so I coordinate and help like get the documentation and stuff that we need set up in order to make that magic happen. I I work with people who want to be involved. Like, hey, do you want to run like meetings associated with this challenge? Or do you want to try and hype people up about this challenge? Or do you want to help me write documentation about this challenge? So I try and rally around that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't do that alone. Yeah, as you alluded to, Becca, I do that with my co-lead on that is Orly, and that is so wonderful that we co-lead that together, because it's a volunteer position, right? We do what we can to give back, but we also do have jobs and families. And so sometimes we can't do as much as we'd like to. And it's nice to have somebody else there to help balance that.
I keep hitting the mute and unmute button like multiple times. I don't know what's going on. Extra clicky today. Sorry. Yes, that is a great overview of what our monthly challenges are. And they've been a lot of fun, I think, working through them. And like you said, we've had, I think, at least 13, and we're kind of iterating on that this second year around, trying to figure out how things work. And one of the great things I love to see is how many people are helping each other through that process, or continuing. We had Month of Pairing a couple months ago, and somebody messaged me recently and said, I really loved being able to pair with other people, and I want to keep that going. And those are the kind of stories that really I don't make my heart feel happy. I'm not sure how else to put it. Because there's this love of the community that develops through these things. And, for us, we haven't made a competition out of it, although we've had leaderboards and stuff, but it's not like, oh, it's a race to the top of the leaderboard. It's just cool to be able to see what everybody's doing and how they're doing it. And I'm really excited as we're going into the second year of monthly challenges with this team of people to see all of the connections that are continually made and how we can keep supporting each other.
Yeah, it's really hard to say like all I want to say about it. I keep getting like lost in my own thoughts. But yes, so some of the challenges that so we did a writing challenge in November, where we supported each other members in in writing blog posts or putting out content. And right, there was like a leaderboard individually. You could see who put in how many words, but that wasn't the challenge. The challenge was the number challenge was, we had a goal to hit. How many can we hit this many words? I think, was it 100,000?
I think it ended up being over that, right? Did we hit the 120, Dan? Do you remember?
Yeah. I just looked at it. I'm trying to remember. I like literally looked at it yesterday because I was doing this. I can look it up really quick.
Yeah, our
But
challenge was like 50,000 and we blew it
yeah,
out of the water.
we blasted past that in like a week, I think.
Yeah, it was.
I see. Well, we got to 125, over 125,000. So
Whoop,
Yeah.
whoop.
Absolutely crazy.
it was pretty dope.
And we had individual contributors there, right? Who they wrote a lot of words, and it's amazing. But we also succeeded together in crushing that goal. And I think on another individual basis, I think people succeeded in just writing something for the first time. As someone who runs the challenge, I've tried to balance me participating and running it, and I just can't. I can't do well at both. But I do love supporting that. And so, right, giving somebody an avenue to do something for the first time, to write a blog post for the first time. You see a lot of developers do that. And if you want to do it, it can be super intimidating. Being on a podcast can be super intimidating. And so when you see other people doing it and you have that support, you're able to do that kind of stuff. But I wanted to highlight too, like one of the monthly challenges we did that I really liked. I think we did it for December, and I can't remember what we called it, but it was about doing like your own. What's your passion outside of your job? What's your passion outside of the technical skill set you have that brought you to Virtual Coffee? Let's talk about that. Let's celebrate that. There was some really cool stuff in music. We had people sharing their own musical talents. I think that was Jessica who shared some cool videos in that. We saw tons of yarn work, a lot of knitters in BC.
And new knitters too. Some people just took it up. It was the Creative Community Challenge.
Yes. So, right. Then, so even in that, like people were inspiring other people to pick up new things. And I think I love that about VC, is getting to share that kind of stuff too. I get to talk about programming all day at work. Sometimes I just want to talk to people about the things that I like to do. Like for Creative Community, I think I built a 3D puzzle and I had a lot of fun, and it was very zen and not stressful at all.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I'm glad that you brought that one up, because it's something that more and more I'm finding that I need to take a break from coding things, because it's just constant coding or community. And I love it, but I do find that my brain is sometimes just exhausted and anxious because I'm overwhelmed with all of these things that I'm doing and trying to learn. And you're never going to learn it all. You're never going to be an expert at every single thing. And I think that really, for me, it's about like, okay, I've learned how to do these things, but I need to make space for other things that don't feel productive, that help me to learn how to relax, which I hear is a thing that some people do. Still trying to figure that one out.
What?
And so I think it is initially Kirk's idea that monthly challenges should have 4 quarters, and 1 month per quarter should be devoted to non-tech things. And we've even been like doing more non-technical topics in Virtual Coffee, just to say like, hey, it was okay. One time we talked about like cleaning products for almost the entire time. I'm not good at cleaning and I don't like it, but I think I'm fascinated that there are all these tools out there that I don't know exist because I avoid knowing anything about it. But it was really a great conversation. I'm like, oh, okay. Now I know this adult thing.
Yeah, we are in Virtual Coffee, and in any community you form, I think we're all diverse people with diverse interests. And in the case of Virtual Coffee, we're brought together by one common interest. But we get to learn from each other about all this other stuff. And I think that's one of my favorite things about BC.
Same. And I've been doing a lot of research on communities and community building, and there's different categories that communities are often grouped into. And I kind of love that I don't feel like we really fit into one category. Yes, we're here because we're all interested in tech. But if you look at the conversations among people and the connections that are created, most of the deep connections are not because we're here for tech. It's because we relate to each other on a different level. And that comes with, like bringing who we are and our interests outside of tech into the conversation, because that to some extent allows for more vulnerability and openness to happen. And I just love how great that is, and how it's something that we work hard to kind of preserve as part of our community.
Yeah, very much. I keep thinking of like all these instances of my interactions with other community members. So I keep name dropping them. And if that ends up being an issue, we can just throw like a clucking chicken sound or something over me saying the names.
Name drop them all.
But Kirk and I will have Zoom calls sometimes where like sometimes we talk about programming topics, but oftentimes I find with him, we'll just like wax philosophical for an hour. And then it was like, where did the time go? Like we came on this call to, just chit chat, and that's always sort of where we end up. But I love that. Like that's why I keep coming back, is to talk about philosophy with Kirk.
Kirk is great. I know. So this, well, once this episode airs, this will have been a couple of weeks, but this week we won most welcoming developer community. I think that's it. Is that what it is? Because I keep saying that to people on live things. Something about welcoming. In my mind, we are definitely the most welcoming developer community. I think we won the award for welcoming developer community, so that would make us the most, right, by default, because we
No,
won.
I think the word's called most welcoming developer community.
Then I'm right. Okay, excellent.
That
I don't know where it's going with that, so I was just gonna drop that. We won it.
well earned, well deserved. When I first attended a VC meeting, I very much felt that. It felt like I belonged. And when I got into the Slack and I started like messaging people, like there was a subset of people who made me feel like I belonged. And those names will always stick out to me. As like these were the people who, when I joined VC, they were very active, they were very present, and they made me feel a part of. I think very much about our friend Mike was one of those people.
Yeah, so much of that welcoming spirit. And that is what makes a community special, and the ability to, have those quiet conversations, or, there are tiny things that I think are hard to put into words that, somebody might remember. So, I got a package in the mail for Christmas, no name on it, and it was a box of my favorite tea. I'm like, where did this come from? So I asked Kirk, and Kirk knew who sent it. It was somebody from Virtual Coffee. And it just tiny things like that. I mean, sending a package, I feel like, is a big thing because that requires a lot of energy. But the idea that somebody remembered what my favorite tea was really special. And there are like small moments like that happen all the time with people, or someone will remember something that you said a long time ago and say something to you about it. And it just makes you feel like, yes, these are my friends. And people are like my online friends. I'm like, no, these are my friends, And so I for sure get what you're saying there, Andrew.
I think of like one of my big passions is running, and we have a channel in our Slack that's health and fitness. And so I get to post about that running there sometimes. And it's an opportunity for me to share that. Like the friends I have who live around me, they don't care like about my running. I don't think they're not like, oh, look at this runner over here. Like they're not making fun of me for doing it or something, but they just don't care, and that's fine. But there are people at VC who I can share that with, and they care, and it's like it means so much to me, like running does, as a hobby and a passion, and to have other people like get invested too and care. It's priceless.
Yeah, well, even, you ran a race recently, right? And I remember thinking like, oh, I know that he's running a race. I need to go check and see if he posted about it and ask him. And like that's it. I'm not a huge runner. I've run a couple of 5Ks, but I'm invested in knowing how you did because you're my friend.
Yeah, I see that like I see that with you with weightlifting that you do. Like I've seen like videos of you doing squats, and I'm like, she can definitely squat more than I can. But because I'm not much of a weightlifter, but it's the exact same thing, right? Where I look at that and I'm like, I am here for this. I am here for this success. Your success makes it feel like my success. Let's be successful together.
That's such a great way to describe it. I feel like maybe that's the episode title. Let's be successful together, right? It's just all about lifting each other up. And when times are hard, especially in the last couple of years, being able to do that is I don't know, just like sometimes key to keeping that momentum. I'm going back to my nickname.
The one thing I did want to talk about, kind of related to a lot of the stuff we've said, is like one thing I've learned in VC is I've learned, I don't think I've ever tried to put this into words, so let me give this a
Yeah, it's
shot.
fine.
Like I'm learning how to be myself and be respectful to myself and allow myself space to be a certain way, I guess. I see that like I get I am my own worst critic. I am so hard on myself. I make one mistake and all of a sudden I'm not good enough. And, some of this plays into like imposter syndrome type deal. Like I my favorite analogy for this, and I do feel like this sometimes, is that I am two children in a trench coat who snuck into the movies, and I am going to get caught one of these days. I literally was in a work meeting a couple months ago, and I remember I was talking, there was our CIO was in the meeting and like some other high up people. And for some reason I had the floor and everybody was listening to me, and I just like froze right in the middle of talking. And I thought, what am I doing here? Like, I am too much of a child to be doing this. But I think other people in VC who experience this and have, some success some days at overcoming it, have taught me how to deal with that and how to be okay with that. And one thing, I guess, in sort of this similar vein, that I carry with me a lot and I've carried into work is we talk about, in our VC meetings, we use the raise hand,
Function.
little reaction on Zoom. Yeah. So that people can have space to say what they want to say or share, because it can be really hard to just find space in a conversation. That is a reality in like the real world. It can be very difficult. People have different communication styles, and some people, they're like, if you want to say something, but just interrupt me. That's not me. And I'm very much a listener. So if I'm around a person who talks a lot, I'll just sit quietly. And if they don't ever give me space to say something, I don't say something. There is no You can literally raise your hand in real life, but I'm not going to do that. But in Zoom, there's that raise hand functionality, which allows me to find space. And I know I've talked a lot on this podcast, so it sounds contradictory to me saying that I do that, but I feel like this is somehow a unique case. But I think that is one of those little things. And maybe it wasn't little when it was thought of, and maybe isn't little, I don't know. But it seems like a small decision that was made, right? It's all you do is you press the button, right? But it is so big to me. And I carried that to my work when we have work meetings and we've had like retros, and I'm like, hey, there is not space for some of our quieter members of our team be themselves and to share their thoughts, and we need their thoughts. So, we use that at work now too. And that's a mind dump of like a sort of being myself type thing that I've learned from VC.
Oh, I love that. And it is those tiny things that make a big difference, especially if somebody is an introvert or is neurodiverse or is just not really sure of what to expect within the way that things are happening. And so having those things, I know that at work we use Google Meet, and there's not a hand raise function. And I realize how much I love the hand raise function now that we've been using it. So actually, it was Infinite Red, I think, that introduced us to the hand raise function, because one of their founders wrote a blog post about it. But it's finding those things like that and then bringing them to the community and integrating them in to make everyone feel welcome. That does allow for everyone to feel welcome. Well, Andrew, I appreciate you being here with us today. We're just about out of time. Are there any last things that you'd like to share with our audience, or any words of wisdom?
I think I've said a lot, but I guess the closing thought to tie all this stuff I've said together is I just want to emphasize how much this community is valuable. And to those listening, if you're members of VC or potential members of VC, there is more here than an opportunity at a job, or an opportunity at growing your technical skills. Those things are here. But there's an opportunity to be yourself. There's an opportunity to be around people who are like you. And I think just don't be afraid to join in all the parts that our community has to offer, and share yourself if you get comfortable with that. It's worth it.
I think that's awesome. Thank you, Andrew, so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Becca Harat-Weigel. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffee.io or email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, sign up for the newsletter, check out any of our other resources on our website, virtualcoffee.io. If you're interested in sponsoring Virtual Coffee, you can find out more information on our website at virtualcoffee.io/sponsorship. Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.